So today we're talking about leave no one behind, using your church database to minister to inactive members. So we're going to be talking about Church 360 members. I'm going to try not to make this too much of a sales pitch. Now, as a marketer, this is what I sell, so I often fall into that. But the principles that we have here can really be used for any database. So a little bit about myself. Oops, let me turn that on. That would help. I'm Senior Marketing Manager for Concordia Technology Solutions. We are a part of Concordia Publishing House. I've been with our team on the technology side for almost 6 years. I've been with the publishing house for about 10. So I've gotten to work at a few different areas, and I love interacting with churches on a more individual basis to hear how things are going. So this is why events like this are great for me. But feel free to reach out to me at any time. Again, we're the administration division of CPH. We've been doing software for churches since 1984, which is kind of fascinating to me because technology at that time was very different than it is now. So just to give you a little context, Church 360 members is part of the Church 360 suite, and we have Ledger and Unite as well. Ledger is the finance side, Unite is the website builder. I'll mention those in mainly Unite on a few things in here that we'll talk about. So just to give you that reference, they're all different products that can be used individually as well. But to really get on, oh yeah, and then I forgot I had this slide on here. The people, attendance, and offerings is what is really focused on in Church 360 members, and you'll see that right away in our first topic point, that data is key for tracking inactive members, because attendance and offerings are usually very good indicators when trends change, that something's going on in a person's life, and if you don't have that information, it's harder to identify unless you remember that they're not there. So this is my church in Afton, Missouri. My house is right around here. So we're very close. My wife teaches at the school there. We've been going there for about 10 years. And several years ago, 3 or 4 years now, I joined the board of elders. And one of our expectations is to follow up with active members. But the way that we received the information was a quarterly spreadsheet from the church office that had simply last attended date. And usually we would get it a few weeks after the last data had been entered in, and so it was always out of date, and I was always very hesitant to communicate with the inactive members because I didn't know if they were truly inactive, if the data was there. And so it took a while, as in many churches, to adopt new technology, but last year we began using Church 360 members, and it's really benefited us from the ministry side of things. And the best example I have was from a communion visit. It was right after we got Church 360 members, and there was a funeral at our church, and a lady came by and stopped by the church office and said, "I've been at home for the last 4 months and I haven't had communion. Can you have pastor come and commune me?" And it was such a shame because pastor had no intention of forgetting her. It just, she got lost in the shuffle. And so I was able to go and commune her, but just talking to her, she's like, "I thought the church had forgotten about me." And that just broke my heart, that just by poor management we missed her. And so that's why this is a very passionate subject for me, because it's so important for those who are not actively coming, whether it's intentional or unintentional, to follow up and keep them connected to the body of Christ. And creating tools like this just makes it that much easier to solve that problem. So our goals for today are to outline a strategy for ministering to inactive members. So I've got 5 key points, and those 5 key things can be applied in any context, with any tool, I should say. They're not so difficult that you can't pick up a spreadsheet and do it. But the goal would be to help you better leverage church management software, and specifically in this case, Church 360 members. But we have another tool called Shepherd Staff that thousands of churches use. There's many other options there that do most of the same things. So finally, hope to empower not just pastors, but elders and deacons and other lay leaders in the congregation to be able to utilize this information to minister to people who are not coming regularly. All right, so the first step out of the 5 steps is to track relevant data. And I'm a data nerd. I love Excel. I love to see the trends and to be able to apply that because it's reflective of real life. And part of it too is from a memory perspective. I can't keep track of all of this stuff. Good morning, or good afternoon. Come on in. So I think part of my use of technology has limited my memory to things that I can't recall things as quickly as I used to because I don't need to. I can search for it and look it up. So step number one is to track the relevant data so that you can see these trends, so that you can see these changes when they occur. Of course, the first thing is profile information. And so this is an example of a profile view, and this is common information that you might collect on a new member form. And so it would be things like their contact information, email and phone number, their family history, or family connections within the church. We do it so that it's not just those within the household, but those within the church, or even visitors. That's a great way to exclude people from certain lists. You know, when my parents come to visit us, they get tracked as attended, but they don't need any kind of follow-up from the church office because they're not going to be moving to St. Louis anytime soon. Life events, and in fact, I moved it out of the way. I'll show you on here. We have things like baptism, birthday, baptism, confirmation, death date, so that you can keep those things in mind. And having those two things, those life events, but also the family connections. Family life events are sometimes a very key thing. So if you happen to notice people fell into the inactive list, and then you didn't know that they just had a baby, that might be a good explanation for why. So having that relevant data easily accessible can help with the context to the situation. Demographic information as well, age, and we have, and there are a few other things that are meant for denominational reports like ethnic background. You can also add custom fields so you can keep track of other things that are relevant, like faith background, what they grew up, what church they grew up in, things like that. We have here what we call tags, and tags are to collect every other piece of information that you might not have a place to store. And we often, in Shepherd staff, we call it activities, skills, and trainings. That's a really good example of the kind of things you might want to track. We think of tags as kind of like Post-it notes. They're either true or they aren't true. You stick it on or you take it off. But that helps you segment down in different ways. The other thing, yeah, like I mentioned, custom fields. One that I recommend is like occupation or employer, to be able to see in a structured way the same information for each person. So that allows you to track relevant things like maybe work shift. If somebody's working second shift or third shift, that may indicate why they're not coming to worship regularly. All right, and the last thing is notes. And we'll talk about this in a bit more detail as we get into pastoral visits. That's going to be coming in. Hello, thanks for joining us.
Let us out of the...
Oh, no problem. I figure we'll get a few more. Maybe I should have waited. I didn't know it was going long.
Yeah,
so.
it just got out, so...
Okay. Very good. Well, you haven't missed too much. So we're on the first step in 5 steps for helping with ministering to inactive members. So the first thing is to track relevant data. And so the profile information for people, if you don't already have it stored in one spot or have it stored in a place where others can see it, it's not as useful. And this is really the key part. The next thing that we have is entering attendance. And this is not just for worship attendance. Hey, Mike, come on in. I'm curious, how many of you at your churches track individual worship attendance? All right, good. Excellent, just about everybody. That's how I grew up. My home church, my current church, we always had the cards that you'd fill out and put in. But as I've worked at CTS, I've learned that that's not as common as I thought. That more and more, I'm finding more and more churches who just simply take total attendance at their worship services. Especially larger churches, it's a head count because it's harder to get that. But really, that's the key part of monitoring for inactive members, especially as you get into the larger churches. You know, smaller congregations that have 30, 40 weekly attendance, usually the pastor can pick up on when people are not there. But when you have a larger church with 3 or 4 services, it's really hard to keep track of who's not there, much less who's there. I mean, it's hard to remember that.
Why
I don't have dedicated research for it, but I can tell you the reasons that I hear is that the effort of doing so is too much for them. So either asking members to fill out information. Many churches that don't have a history of this, their members are very uncomfortable sharing that. They feel like it's a big brother watching them. They don't understand the practical side of it. So that's the other point. So it's either too much effort to track it, or people are uncomfortable introducing that into their congregation. So that's what I've heard from the people who do it. I'm kind of surprised how many people, when they hear that individual attendance is a thing, they're surprised by that because they didn't grow up in a church with that. So yeah, that's been fascinating for me to learn. But for this topic, I mean, understanding when people go from an active to inactive member, I don't know how easy it is to track it without that individual attendance. So come on in. I'm sorry, I heard that the session went late, so feel free to come take a. Oh, no problem. So we are in the first step of 5-step strategies for tracking and ministering to inactive members. So we're talking about tracking relevant data. So, and for those of you who are just coming in, we're focusing on Church 360 members, but I really don't want this to be a sales pitch for this. These principles will work for anyone. All right, so you can take attendance by head count, total, or both. The one challenge that I've heard with taking it by attendance is then you don't get the true number because not everybody fills out their form or fills out the card. And so what many congregations will do is they'll do both. They'll have the ushers take a head count, and they'll have the members fill out the individual attendance, and then they kind of combine them. And so you get the best of both worlds, your overall trends and your individual attendance. Now, what you can also do, and I highly recommend doing this, is figure out the other events that indicate when there might be changes in a faith life, when somebody might be falling away. So Bible study attendance, small group attendance, even things like Sunday school. If the kids stop attending, but you don't stop attending Sunday school, but you don't see a difference in the worship patterns, that might indicate something as well. And so that, again, adds more work to it. Those are a little bit easier, though, because you're not talking about hundreds. You're usually talking about dozens of people to take attendance. And so that's helpful. So you can track all of that. But it's really critical for identifying inactive members, because that's the first sign if they stop attending. The other way of doing this, the challenge I mentioned before, how much time it takes, is that this is not, on a weekly basis, real sensitive information to say who is there. Because certainly if you were there, you can look around and see who did attend. And so many churches utilize volunteers for entering attendance. And it may be the practice that the volunteer picks up the attendance cards after church on Sunday and takes it home and enters it in. If you have a web-based solution, you can give access from home. And so that's a way to kind of handle that. It doesn't have to be the people who are following up. It just has to be a willing volunteer. All right, offering data. This is a very sensitive subject because people don't like others knowing what they give, and I understand that. Obviously, that's a very personal decision on how much you give. Offerings are a very good indicator, if changes in offering patterns, I should say, are a very good indicator of if somebody is falling away from the church. If you see regular giving and then all of a sudden it becomes sporadic or stops completely, that's a cause for concern. Certainly on the financial side, it's a cause for concern, but more importantly on the spiritual side, if something has changed, it may be that they lost their job and don't want anybody to know. It could just be that they're going elsewhere, or they could have gotten upset by something. I hear often that when people are upset, one of the first things they do is cut back on giving. And it's a sad thing, but they see it as almost punishing the church if they've been upset by something. And so, again, it's a trend on how you, a change in their life that could indicate somebody needs to reach out to them. So the other thing with this, and this goes kind of on the flip side, but for new people, offering is often the way that you find out information about them, like contact information. So if they are, I know it's much more rare today to write a check and put it in the plate, but electronic offerings, and that's one of my points on here, you can get that additional details. So offering trends could signal changes at home, Privacy of giving needs to be discussed at your congregation, how you do this. I know that most congregations that I've talked to have volunteers, sometimes the finance board, or sometimes it is the church office staff. There's ways to provide more privacy by offering envelopes that then it's just a number, so one person collects it and writes the total, the other people enter it. We allow in Church 360 to separate that connection between offering envelopes and names so that you never see those. You just enter what is given in the plate. And that gives that additional privacy. So yeah, enter by name, envelope number, or both. And then e-giving integration. We work with Vanco Payment Solutions. What's great about that is it allows people to sign up, and all of their contact information flows into 360 as well, so that you could add those contacts. So that doesn't help as much on the inactive members, but it is a way for those who are unable to attend worship to give regularly too. So those are the three types of data that you should be keeping track of on a regular basis. The personal information, having that database of your members that is easily accessible and all the information in one place. Their attendance records at worship and other events, and then offering information. So that's number one. Number two is to start to identify those inactive members. It's very hard to minister to them if you don't know who they are. And so there's a variety of tools in terms of how to group members. And we have two key things. So the first one is dynamic groups, we call smart groups. So they're based off of specific information that is changing within the database. And you'll see this in a variety of ways in different names. So in Shepherd Staff, we call it dynamic lists versus static list. Here we call it smart groups versus tags. So tags is the other way of doing that, tracking anything. Smart groups are built on dynamic data such as worship attendance or giving trends, if they've done this in X amount of time. And I'll show you an example that I use for tracking my elder district as well. So tags allow you to track the other information. That's less important for tracking trends, but it could allow you to easily group these people. So you could have an inactive member tag that you would put on people so that you can identify that they're in that set. You could have it for a different stage for following up. So first contact made or second contact made. Custom fields also work really well for that, so that you could have a drop-down list to say, all right, here is our flow. We're going to contact, and once the person becomes inactive, we're going to contact them 5 times, and that allows you to say which group they're in. If they are, have been contacted the 3rd time, but then they'll show up in a different list, and maybe that's the time where it's not a layperson or an elder, it's the pastor following up. Structuring it in that way allows you to create these different lists. So the relationships are key. If you are finding that there's people who are not attending, but they have somebody else who is attending, so a family member is not, you could have that be your dynamic list. So one list may be no one in the family is attending, and another may be those individuals within the family have stopped attending. Historical data, that goes back quite a ways depending on how long you keep it. That helps you identify the trends. And I should note that this grouping is going to be different for every church, depending on how you identify inactive members. We don't have an automatic thing that says that these people have become inactive, because for some churches it may be after they've missed 2 weeks, and for other churches it may be after 2 months. It just really depends on the culture of your church. All right, and then the last thing is geographical. You could create these groups geographically so that if you are doing personal visits and going and knocking on the door, you could group them together to say, okay, here is this zip code, so here are all the inactives, and you can share that with whoever is making those follow-ups. So here's an example of one that you can do, and it just gives you a little bit of a taste of the types of data that is available to track. We always put our living first, because for groupings, you may, for like All Saints Sunday, you may want to see the list of everybody who has passed away, and so that's a default thing. But anybody who's a member now, whose elder district is in District 2, that's my group, and then who have not attended worship in the last 30 days. And so to be able to quickly identify them in that way. And that'll dynamically change. But you could add other things on there and say anyone who has not attended worship in the last 30 days and who have not had the tag of first follow-up visit, and it'll show anybody who's new that's been added to that. Hello. Yeah, we're all set. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, so from another way to identify them is through attendance reports. And this is one we've worked on to make more useful in a variety of ways. What this does is it allows you to pull that list of people. So anyone who's absentees, this is my demo database, so don't worry, those are not real names on there. I didn't want to share anybody from my church. The criteria for my church is fine. Once we start showing names, that's a little different. So these are not real people on here. But it shows, their worship attendance patterns. So anywhere, I know it's probably hard to see from a distance, anywhere there's a green, that means that they have attended, and anywhere there's a blank. A darker blank means there was an event for them to attend, and then the blanks are that they haven't. And so you can start looking by percent. So maybe it's not that they haven't attended in the last few weeks, but it's they've attended only X amount of times in the last 3 months, and that their attendance is starting to lag. And so you can see this kind of trend data and identify the highest priorities to see who has attended the least amount in a given period of time.
Peter,
Yep.
you said
Oops.
that attract attendance, but also events.
Mm-hmm. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, it never occurred to me to track events.
Mm-hmm. So you could look at it by what we call calendars. So in this case, you would assign different calendars to events, and you can have multiple calendars assigned to events. So you could use this for like communion attendance as well. But Bible studies, fellowship events, you could look at it in that way and say just anybody who's not been in worship. And you can make your smart groups that same way. Anybody who's not been in worship or education or fellowship in this given time period. So it allows you that flexibility, and that's one of the key things, because every church's culture is a little bit different. Being able to set it up in that way is important. So a few notes on reports. You can easily generate reports based on people trends in terms of coming and going from the church, attendance, and offerings. So the other thing that's really great about this is, like I mentioned at the beginning, I know many of you came in after this, when I first joined the Board of Elders, our way of tracking inactive members was a quarterly report of our district where it gave the last attended date, and that's it. No other context than just the last time they attended. And so not having that context, we couldn't easily identify who we needed to follow up on. With having a web-based system like this, I can go in at any time and check it and not rely on the church office to share this information on their schedule, but it can be based on in real time anytime I log in. And that's key for volunteers, because especially the paid staff doesn't have, their time is quite busy, and to manage this process for the entire church requires that additional assistance of lay leaders in most cases. So being able to give them access when and where they need it is key. Prevent printing reports by sharing electronically. This is key, because again, it doesn't require anything on the church staff. You're not sharing printed reports. You're also not printing those reports and having them available to happen to be seen by somebody else, which always makes me nervous.
I have a silly question.
Sure.
We're from a smaller church, but so how do you go in and keep this attendance? So whether it's just attendance to church service, or like you said, you could do attendance for communion, or how, like if they don't fill out a form, I mean, are you just missing those people who don't fill that out?
Sometimes. It depends on the size of your church. What I recommend it for small to medium-sized churches is that after the attendance is taken, asking pastor to go through the list and say, okay, especially on Communion Sunday, because they come up and he sees them, and are we missing anybody? Because there will be people who are uncomfortable filling out the cards or filling out the books, and it's a good double check. It also helps pastor remember and see on there who has and hasn't been there on a given week, and kind of have that extra memory in there. But otherwise, if they're not filling out something and you don't have somebody like the pastor spotting for that, then they do get missed. But they show up as unattended, and so they get flagged in this system as opposed to the other way where they're not actually there. The worst ones are when you have people who are not there, but somebody else fills out the card for them. That happens in a school setting when you are giving tuition discounts and that. But those are a little bit harder to identify. So, but yeah, we had on that school tuition thing, we had a family that was falling off the attendance percentage, and we talked about it. Elders and like, well, we've seen them here almost every week. They just were uncomfortable filling out the cards, and so we talked to them about this is why it's valuable. So that kind of changed that habit. But yeah, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. All right. Step number 3. So step number 2 is identifying those people, and that's through smart groups or tags and creating reports based on that are easily accessible. But then 3 is sharing the list with the right people. So if you're not having individuals logging in, some people are uncomfortable with that. I know our board of elders, when I joined, me and one other gentleman were the youngest by about 20 years. And so it's often people who are not as comfortable with technology. So there is other ways of sharing to get it out. If people are comfortable logging in but not comfortable generating the list, you can use these people view reports, which allows you to structure this data in exactly the way you need it and save that. So all they have to do is go to that report and view it. And so you can have any kind of combination of columns, which are the contact information, the search and filter, so you filter down by those individual traits. You can save it just to a smart group. Then what you can do from here as well, and this may be how they use it or how you use it in the church office to help, you can export those lists as mailing labels or a church directory, which I'll show you in a minute. We call it a church directory, which has a different connotation to it, like an all church, but it would be a subset of the church. And then you can also do this in groupings by households or marriages, even givers if that's the concern. But the household one is especially good because it identifies every member in the household, but it'll flag those who are not part of the absentee list. And so you know that it may not be everybody, but this household is one that I need to stop and talk to as well. So, oh, sure. This is Church 360 members from Concordia Technology Solutions, or CPH. Yep. So, very good. So there is also the mobile view, and this has been incredibly helpful to me, having this information on my phone. And within Church 360, we have it so that it syncs with our contacts on our phones based on our permissions. But you can also visit the mobile site, and it gives you that same information in a much more structured format. It's a lot easier. So you can see the core data. It doesn't show everything that the desktop version does on that view, but you can still search and apply smart groups as well. But this mobile profile view, and we'll look at that in one of the following steps in a little bit more detail, is especially helpful because it's every single thing that's on the profile view just accessible on your phone. So you can still see those household and family information, the notes. As you're stopping to follow up with a person, it's really nice to pull it up and see that on your phone ahead of time so you have that context. So it also allows you to quickly call or email and then easily add pastoral visits and notes. And that's what we'll talk about in a few minutes. But this is an example of that directory. It's essentially a formatted export. And so if you don't have if you have people who are not as tech savvy that don't want the access but still want the list, you can print out a list of their absentees, their inactive members, and distribute it in this way. And then you can always, it goes to Word, so you can add add additional notes to that. So while I don't love printing out things to hand out, especially when there's sensitive information, in some cases that's absolutely required based on the people. You know, you have, just because you can't use technology well or aren't comfortable using technology doesn't mean that you can't serve in this capacity. And so we want to enable them to have that information. All right, so distributing that information is step 3. Starting your follow-up actions and logging them is step 4. And that's a key part of it. Obviously, actually taking the action is the key part, but logging that and keeping that information available. So we have in here a tool at the contact level called Notes and Pastoral Visits. And this is an area that, at least at my church, they've really latched onto and understand well. From the church office to the pastors and the elders. And we've got some of the elders who are very good, even putting every birthday card that they send out in here just to identify that communication. But I'll walk you through this process a little bit. There's 2 things called notes and visits that are very similar. Notes are essentially this down here at the bottom, which is just a date and a note and then a permission level. And visits take it a bit farther to say who it was that was doing the visiting, what type of visit it was. So in this case, it's a home visit, and you can have multiple types of visits. So a home visit, a communion visit, a second follow-up visit. You could put those in there so you could structure it. But then you can have multiple notes. So you can have the notes in there that can be seen by elders and pastors, and then you could have the notes that could be seen by the church office staff, or the notes that can be seen by anybody who has access in there. So the more sensitive it is, the fewer people you can give access to. And as a pastor, if you don't want anybody else but you to see this, you could put that in for either me only or for pastors. And if you're a sole pastor, the next pastor who comes in after you could still have that information. And so that privacy is key, but is really important as you're talking about inactives, because a lot of the reasons why people stop coming are very sensitive things, and you don't want that being shared with everyone. But it also does allow you to put in that note that says, I stopped by and visited Joe, and then for pastor you can tell, Joe's really struggling with his faith right now, and put that in there. So those are the 2 types of things. The pastoral visits allows you to see those. If you put it in that way, you can pull reports based off of those visits as a whole and group them by who has all been to that, or show me, all of this elder's visits in the last month, or all of his is for this person, and see them in that way, which is very helpful. But what I find especially helpful is this is all available on the mobile view too. So like I mentioned, adding it if there's multiple people. So if pastor and an elder go to visit, you can log that so that you have that record of it. Marking them as the very specific types, that's helpful. Like I said, we track birthday cards, so birthday card is a type of visit. We struggle naming this because pastoral visit implies only the pastor, but we named it in the context of pastoral care as opposed to just the office of the pastor. But then also visits, like we have it here that it's marked a home visit. It's essentially a tag for a visit, but if we called it tag, it would be confusing with the other one. So don't let the naming throw you. We haven't found the right words that everybody responds well to yet. We've tried out a few things, but really allows you to be flexible on how you put that in there. Adding multiple notes, each with specific permissions.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Can you, if you have a similar program, like I was talking to you yesterday
Yeah.
from High Rise, can I transfer the information from High Rise to Church 360 or no?
We do offer a data conversion process. It depends on how easily you can get it out of High Rise to put it in there. So we'll work with you on that and look at it up front to see what we can do before there's any kind of commitment in place. Yeah, every system is different. We've tried to build automatic imports from other systems, but they change so frequently that we can't keep that up to date. So yeah, but there is that opportunity. There is an additional fee with that because it's a very manual process. But we have our support technicians go through the data and work with you to get it right. So, because that is a key part of it. Once you have it somewhere, you don't want to lose it anywhere by moving to something else. There, I mentioned this before, but I put it in this spot because it's really effective for pastoral visits and notes. we have household profiles in addition to family or individual profiles. The households are based on an address, not so much based on a family, because family relationships can go outside of households. And so many congregations will have grandma and grandpa in one household, their kids in another one, and their grown grandkids in another household, but you want to show those connections. But what's nice about the households is that they contain all the people at a specific address, but contact details as well as notes and visits flow down to all members of the household. So if you're visiting the household, you enter it in the household and it's shown for everybody else. And that makes it a little bit more efficient. You don't want to, you could still add separate notes for different people depending on conversations, but it saves a little bit of time. And I know that many churches will view it in that way, that it's all about visiting households more than individuals and having that conversation in the context of everybody. Bless you. So that's household profiles. Another tool that we have in here that is great for follow-up, and it's very impersonal, and I'd be careful how you use this, but the ability to bulk email directly from within here. And it sends it from your default email client. So if you're using Outlook, it sends it from Outlook. The recipients don't see the other recipients' details, so it's limits the reply all. No one else knows that somebody else is on there. So as you're getting to like Easter coming up, communicating en masse to your inactives, but doing it within the context of the fact that we haven't seen you in a while, we'd love to see you come for Easter worship. You could quickly communicate with them in a little bit more personalized way, but in a time-saving bulk way. It's the same message for that audience. And so, like I said, email for following up with inactives is not my preferred way of doing it, because email is less personal than a phone call or a visit, but it can be efficient. Yeah?
Would that go to the head of the household type email, or would that be every single person?
It would be everybody that you set up, but then you can pick which email addresses to send it to. So you could identify all of them, but maybe you don't want to send that to their work email. You just send it to their personal email. And it remembers those settings too. But yeah, that way it's you have that last step after you first pick the people, then you pick which email addresses to send it to. So keeps it with your intentions and not accidentally sending that email. We do the same thing with contribution statements, because you don't want the contribution statement going to the entire family, especially if there's others in the household not related to them. So you can also just easily do this by going back to your smart groups. You have these dynamic groups that show your inactive list. You pull that up and you click send email to them. So it makes that bulk communication a lot easier and quicker while still being, to a certain extent, personal. And then I mentioned this before, but mailing labels is another great thing to be able to send letters to individuals or to the households. So if you are looking for another way to communicate with them, it makes it really easy to just say, okay, take this list and generate mailing labels for it. So as you look at holiday services and upcoming fellowship events, that's one more touch point that you could have with those individuals. All right, and yeah, again, choose recipients from a smart group or tags. Now, going back to pastoral visits, this is our events view, and this shows all of the different types of events on calendars, so worship and fellowship and otherwise. But those are the standard events like education in there too. But there's also the special events like their anniversaries, baptism anniversary, birthdays, wedding anniversaries, even death anniversaries, but also pastoral visits. So you can see your list of previous or upcoming pastoral visits on your calendar. But having those anniversaries on there also points to that, that quick follow-up of saying, okay, maybe this is the time I reach out to them and just remind them of their baptism birthday, or just wish them a happy birthday, to be able to see it in that way easily. And you can view these in any combination of calendars and even set it by month or week. We do the week view, makes it really easy for like newsletters and stuff.
So it takes all that information that's in their profile, and it automatically
maps it to the calendar.
maps it to the calendar.
Yep. It makes it real easy to see that as in an aggregate form. It can be a little overwhelming sometimes when you have a lot of people in there, but it's a good way to see it. That pastoral visits, though, is especially nice because it's not a church event, but it's an event that's important to you as a church worker or a volunteer. So, and this also comes over on the mobile device on a day view or a month view. So you can still view all of them by month or day, but this part of it, when you have the birthday, all you have to do is click on it to get to their profile and see the additional information. So you can pull that up, see who the birthday is, click on it, call them, and email them. It makes it nice and easy. So, and then all the scheduled visits. So I mentioned this a little bit before, and I've used this slide. There's quite a bit of details on here, so I'll go over it briefly. But this mobile import, we utilize a thing called CardDAV that's native to iPhones and available to other ones. But this allows you to sync your database with the individual contacts on your phone, which is especially nice for things like caller ID. So you don't have to add all your members to the phone. So if they're calling you, you can see it. But also if you want to call them, you don't have to log into Church 360 to see it. You just pull up your contacts and click on them. And a lot of the details come over, details that you wouldn't normally have in your phone's contacts about people. So like even things like birthday information, but depending on which app you're using, you could even have their baptism date and confirmation date show up on there. Depending on how you have your notifications, your phone might automatically remind you that it's so-and-so's baptism birthday or their wedding anniversary, and bringing over profile information. But the other thing that's really nice is those notes, and I should include pastoral visits in that too. Those will show up on your contact record on your phone based on your permission level. And so again, you don't have to log in to see it. It's in the context that you're used to using. So that's a nice little add-on that we've put on there, and I use that quite a bit. One thing that I ran into is that sometimes people's cell phones were put as the household phone and flowed down to all of the people in the household. And so occasionally I've seen that, a 6-year-old is calling me because it's actually their parent's cell phone. But that's just bad data on our side, so I try to go in and fix that. But it's really helpful for those follow-ups. And again, if you're out visiting, it puts it right in the context of where you're at and makes it easily accessible. So if you're interested, I've got this as part of the slide. You can watch that or look at that in more detail later on. I'll be sharing the slides with you. I think I may have forgotten to mention that at the beginning. If you haven't signed up on the sign-up sheet with your email, please do. And I'll be sending out an email early next week of all of my presentations from this, not just this one. So if you're only interested in this one, you may have to scroll down the email a little bit. Step 5 of that. So step 4 is to log all of your activities. Start making the follow-ups and logging them. Step 5 is that long-term thing of keeping others informed. So we've kind of talked about this in a little bit, but this is to reiterate that, that what you're doing here is not just a one-time thing for you. It's providing the context for the others in your congregation or the people that are coming after you. And so we have what we call roles and logins. Roles are sets of permissions that are individualized, so they're very finely grained permissions where you can set kind of a checkbox of if this person can do this. And then logins, it gives only the access that users need so that you can keep those permissions in place. But you can also apply multiple roles to individual users. So like in my context, I'm both on church council and the board of elders, so those are different permission levels. For me, I get the sum of each of those. When I leave one of those boards, then they can just remove that one for me. So it makes that management really easy. Like I talked before, if you have a specific role for pastor, pastor can leave notes to that role even if there's no one else in that role right now. But in the future role, or the future pastors will be able to see that and have that context too. So it makes controlling this private information really easy and again, private. So it also applies to mobile and all of the syncs that you have with that. So it keeps that permission across platform. So the key things to do with this, to keep others informed, obviously notes with the specific permissions, but keeping in mind the historical context for record keeping. pastoral visits with appropriate types and permission-based notes. All of that just gives a fuller picture of the efforts that have been tried to reach out to these inactive members. And then lastly, the smart groups that dynamically update this. If your elders are responsible for this, but pastor wants to be able to go in and see at any time where we're at with this, who's been followed up on, who hasn't been followed up on, who hasn't received communion in several months, to be able to do that based on others' efforts makes his job that much easier. So those are the key things. The rest of this is just the information for how to access Church 360, and be happy to show you that. But before I go further, what questions can I answer for today? Yes?
Do you have an input for grade level?
We do have that. It's we put in a Sunday school grade right now, but yeah, it's essentially grade level, and there's a tool that automatically updates it at a specific time of the year that you set it for. Yeah, good question.
It said on a couple of slides ago with all the what Windows and iOS and everybody offers, that right there, on the notes that it isn't for iOS 9. Will Church 360 be updating as each new system comes out?
It will, because we use this third-party tool called CardDev, we're dependent on that keeping up to date, but since it is it is native in iOS, it should only get better in that, because CardDev is a connection between contact cards that is almost like a single format that others use. So yeah, it'll continue to maintain that. So good. Other questions I can answer? Well, like I said at the beginning, I don't want this to be a complete sales pitch for Church 360. These principles can apply regardless of your database. I am a marketer. I do sell 360, so I tend to speak in those terms. But I'd love to hear any questions you'd have about the strategy. If there's things that you found in here that are especially helpful, I'd love to hear that too. Or if you have ideas that I haven't mentioned, that always helps me to share that even further. So, yes.
How many years has it been around? How many churches approximately?
Oh, sure. It's been around for about 5 years. We've got around 825 churches using it.
What's your largest church?
Our largest church is, our largest plan is 651 member households. And so a member household usually has about 2 people in that, but it's 651 plus households. So I know our largest database is LWML. They use this for keeping track of their records and all of their donors. And so we kind of use them as the benchmark for all of our speeds and efficiency.
Do you find that congregations that use this replace their picture directory with this? So
Not
that members can, because
sure.
you've got that issue. It's always out of date when you print it.
Oh, it's always out of date. It can, if it's a cost savings move, is that you can keep it up to date to distribute those lists, and it's always the source of contact information. And especially as you're making those visits, keeping the phone numbers and everything up to date. What I have found with church directories is often that's the time when churches get the new photos. You never get the full percent. I mean, if you get 50% of your members to take photos, that's great. But it is a way to keep that. Yes. So the pictures that I showed today are stock photos. My congregation, we used our pictures from, I think it was 3 years ago when we had our last photo directory. What we recommend for the church directory in here is to have it be either the supplement or just the annual printing that you do of that for your members, and then have the really nice one every 4 or 5 years, however often your church does it. Or what I often see is that this is the church staff directory, because they can quickly and easily print it out once a month and have it, the most up-to-date version on their desk, and then the members as a whole get their directory during the big go-round with all the photos. So this, in one of my other sessions I mentioned member directories on your website. This connects with Church 360 Unite, our website builder, to allow these photos and the contact information to be available on this password-protected site on your website. And so that often replaces it. But it's not so much on the Church 360 member side, because this is more meant for church staff and volunteers. So that's a different combination. or how that combination kind of works. Yes.
This is kind of just to open up prayer. We have 360 members and Unite, and we transferred Shepherd staff over to the members, and we found that we've lost a lot of the family ties. So we have all the members in the household, but when we pull parents in the smart group, smart group of parents of these kids, they're not in there.
Okay.
Any way to clean that up without going through each individual one and adding and cleaning up families?
Well, that's a restriction of Shepherd staff because the way that Shepherd staff data was structured, it was text fields, not actual data links. We have automated the process as best as we could, but at this point, it really does come into that. Now, it's possible that depending on when you ran the import, that maybe the import is improved. But when did you start using Church 360?
Last April, May, somewhere in there.
Okay, then you probably had the latest version of that, because we did everything we could intelligently do to link it, but that's often the problem, is because it's not like linking true data, it's just linking so-and-so's first name with so-and-so's first name. It's hard to build that connection in. So we've got improvements for that with our new imports. Shepherd staff was always the best way of doing it. For others now, we will link with data fields and structure the conversions in that way. But yeah, I'm sorry. I know that's open prayer. I ran into that when we were converting from ours. There wasn't that data information even in our old software, so I went through and did as much of that as I could. But yeah, it can be time consuming. But once you do it, it's set.
How successful has your church been with using this system to follow up with inactives, and has it really made a difference?
Well, in terms of how successful, it depends on the person. So on our board of elders, we have about 12 of us, and I would say about 8 of us are especially active in that, at least in the logging. Just about everybody uses it for reference. Not all the elders remember to log their things in there. From an identification level, we have identified a number of people who were not being visited, and that has helped us reach out to them. Many of them were shut-ins that should have been visited and got missed in the shuffle because we had a separate database that we were keeping those in. But then it also helped us kind of clean out our database some. Like as we were going through this and we were reviewing the inactives and calling all of them, I mean, some people had moved, some people had switched churches and not let us know. And so we had that initial contact and then removed them from membership appropriately. Because that's often part of it when you're starting, is that most churches I see, their active membership is only about 50% of their total membership because they haven't removed the inactives that have no chance of coming back. And so that's what I've seen with, especially with our church. It's been culling the list down to what is actually appropriate of people who are legitimate inactives who could potentially come back. So, but yeah, we have a few success stories of reaching out to people, and in most cases it has been the shut-ins, and a few cases it's been people who just left the church, and having that reminder has caused them to come back. There's a gentleman in my district who I had never seen at church before. I had an old photo directory, and now this year he's been coming back and faithfully attending and in Bible study, and it's great to see that. He was kind of lost before that, and having been found now, he's attending regularly. So.
The second question I have is, with Church 360, is the price based on, for Church 360, is it based on how many households you have, or?
It's how many member households, and that kind of goes on the other side of the coin of bringing in new people. We don't charge for any non-member households, so if you're keeping track of all your visitors or your prospects, you can keep all of those in there. We have to scale it appropriately, otherwise we'd probably be priced too high for the smaller churches if we did a flat fee, and so we scale the price based on number of member households, so households with at least one person on the roster, or on the membership.
So do you have, can you share, like, for like 700 households, how much?
700 households, that would be, I believe that's around $109 a month. That's our highest plan. 651 plus is our highest plan. So, yeah, and then there's savings for annual pricing, so it's about a 10% savings thereabout. So, yes.
How about 50 households?
50 households, that would be in our most popular plan, our second tier 31 to 150, and that is, I believe, around $35 a month, or it might work out to $35 a month with the annual rate. Our internet here has not been working. I'd be happy to share that information with you. Otherwise, I'd just pull up the prices on there. It is.
60 members.
Yeah. Yep. So sure, yeah, it's the average church is in that range, and so I think it works out to about $35 a month if you pay annually. I think it's $40 a month if you pay monthly. So we have those savings. So and I know it's my software and it's a sales pitch, but it's very competitive within the marketplace. That others are more expensive, and we've tried to keep it as low as possible. So good. I'll share this with you. If you haven't used Church 360 yet and you'd like to start a free trial, you can visit it there. We do have a special promotion going through the end of the month. I know that's coming up very quickly, where we waive the $199 startup fee, which covers all of the onboarding. Our onboarding process is working with an individual who will train your church staff on all the details and work through the data conversion with you to make sure everything transitions nicely. But I'll put my contact information back up here, as well as our software consultants. We'd be happy to walk through a demo and give you a personalized tour of it that's appropriate for your church. But, yes.
Admittedly, I missed the beginning of your session.
Sure.
It's called 360. Where are the metrics for activity coming from before they cross this threshold of needing follow-up?
Sure. So.
Live input from a multifaceted church monitoring type?
Well, it's, that's okay. Yeah, that was the number one part, is making sure to track your data. And it's through attendance at worship or other events, and then offerings, but then also having all of your people stored in there to tie the data back to it. So it is a manual entry, because things like attendance have to be taken up manually. There's not an automatic way that any church I know uses. And then the offerings, if they're given in the offering plate, it's manual. If it's given electronically, it automatically links in. So the data, feeding that data in at first is the key thing, and then everything else flows from there, from the different reports. So, yes?
Is there any, since you got the different reports and privacy at different levels, that you can track like hospital visits and, because you had shut-ins, so you got different classifications. You got shut-ins,
Yep.
you've got hospitals, you've got...
You would put those in as pastoral visits and mark them as hospital. And so then you can pull all of those. You could also either do a tag as hospitalized, or a smart or a custom field as which hospital they're in. I've seen it both ways. But that allows you to quickly and easily group those. So, yes?
Can you do a report on currently who's at which hospital?
Yep, if the best way that I would do that was with a custom field and say just hospital, or you could call it a care facility or something like that. You can also track it so that a person is temporarily in a different location, but that's a little bit harder to report on. The best way is through a tag or a custom field. And so we have just a set of tags for each hospital, so it's hospitalized, and then dash whatever hospital. And so you can pull up those that are in any of those groups. So, yes?
Is there, and I don't know if Church 360 does this, I don't know of one, where both the church and the school, if you're a church and school combined, there's one database that needs to follow that? Okay, I just...
No, it's great. We don't have that.
They can talk to each other?
Sure. We've talked about that a lot, to have whether we should have a school database software. And as we've looked into what's out there, most of them are so multifaceted for the needs of a school that within our church body, the number of schools is low enough to the point that we can't build our own. But what I recommend doing is working with the school staff to keep the the names and the family information in the church database as well. You wouldn't have as many updates. Just do it on an annual basis, where you update all the contact information. But it is a manual thing. Yeah, I have yet to see one that does both of that. Yeah, and in fact, in most church bodies, other than in the Catholic Church, there's not that school aspect of it like we have here in our church body. So, But it's definitely been a point of discussion. We've even run the numbers to see, can we afford doing that? And we've looked at integrating with other solutions. There's just not a common one that meets the needs for all schools. It depends on their size. So, but good question. Thank you for that.
Do you have a booth out there that you can pick, is there more information, pamphlets, or?
CPH has the booth. Normally we direct everybody online because it's constantly changing. We had sales packets for a while, but the software kept changing that it was always out of date. So our website is the best place for that. I do have several videos where I do tours of the software from a different perspective. It always shows a lot of the same things, but from a different end goal. And so I've done this before, where how to track inactives, how to keep track of new ones. That was the one I led on Tuesday, was preparing for Easter visitors and what things to put in place to have easy follow-up after that. So those are available on concordiatechnology.org, or resources.concordiatechnology.org. So, and actually I had question and answers in the last one. I've been putting up our blog, but I'll be linking to our resource center in the email that I send out, because there's tons of stuff, not just about our products, but about some of the other things I've been presenting too. So that'll give you a good idea. And like I said, we can give you a personalized tour too and talk through the specific needs. Good. Well, if you don't have any other questions, thank you very much for coming, and I'd be happy to stick around and talk to any of you individually.